A new dawn for Egypt. Mubarak no longer president, the army takes control. As the nation celebrates, the first steps on a long journey of reform are taken. With plenty of challenges along the way and no clear leadership ready to step up, what's in store for the people of Egypt? This is Inside Story. Hello, a warm welcome to the programme. I'm Laura Kyle. Saturday in Cairo saw people back in Tahrir Square still celebrating Hosni Mubarak's Friday departure. And the military has since stepped in, saying current cabinet will stay in place as a caretaker government before democratic elections. Now, after 30 years in power, it took only 18 days of nationwide demonstrations to force him out. This was the moment it was announced by the Vice President, Omar Suleiman, on state television.
My fellow citizens, at these hard circumstances our country is experiencing, President Mohammed Hosni Mubarak has decided to waive the office of the President of the Republic and instructed the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces to run the affairs of the country.
The briefest of statements, but every word carrying great weight for millions of Egyptians. An historic moment. And joining us to discuss it are our guests in Cairo, above Tahrir Square, blogger and activist Wael Khalil, also in Cairo, Ezzeddine Shukri Fisher, Professor of International Politics at the American University in Cairo, and in Washington, D.C., Samir Shahata, Assistant Professor of Arab Politics at Georgetown University. Thank you, gentlemen, all for being with us. Wael Khalil, I want to start with you. I want to get a quick reaction to the turn of events because they are truly momentous. After 18 days of round-the-clock protests, how did you feel when you heard Suleiman's words?
It's very hard to describe how we felt. I think I was inside the square when the announcement, it was a very brief announcement so that the message was clearly like running through the crowds. He's out. He left the office and everyone was shouting, everyone was hugging each other, everyone was screaming with joy, everyone was dancing, crying, kissing the ground, praying to God. I think it was a moment that had all the feelings of the past years, and I think it's not only the moment of the announcement. I think last night we showed that we're not only capable of making revolutions, we're also capable of celebrating. I've seen street celebrations I've never seen before, and everyone was just happy everywhere I went, not only in Tahrir but throughout the city. And I think it summed up where the population, the whole of the Egyptian people stood yesterday in recognition of the achievement that they all have made possible.
Indeed, there's no doubt that Egyptians are capable of celebrations. We're still seeing them celebrating Saturday morning. Did you expect Mubarak to step aside really so quickly?
We went through different phases in anticipation and optimism to pessimism. I mean, on Thursday, we all expected the stepping down speech will be on Thursday. And the leaks and everyone was talking that this is going to happen, which the only thing that made sense, all the concessions or the promises that the regime made failed to dissuade people from joining the protest or protesting in different ways, or workers to go and strike. So it was clearly that there was an escalation from the side of the revolution, and the only way to stop that was for him to step down. On Thursday, we all waited. To our utter anger and disappointment, he made that sorry speech of Thursday evening, which they were sure, the old regime was sure to pepper it with all "I will, I did, and I continue to do" phrases, just to say that he's still in power. And I think we expected it on Thursday. I was fearing that we might have a bit of a longing of the stalemate. I think I'm happy that they did it on Friday.
The timing of events, the timing of events, if I may interrupt, because the timing of events are quite significant. And I want to bring in Ezzeddine Shukri Fisher at this point, because I understand, sir, that you once worked under Mubarak as an advisor to his foreign ministry. And I wanted to see if you had any insight into why he would have stepped down just 24 hours after saying he was staying put.
Well, I think the question is why he said the night before, as Wael said, why did he say that he would stay in? Everyone was waiting for him to say the magic word that he is leaving. I think after the first few days, it became obvious to everyone that this regime is receding and that a new regime yet to be defined is being born from the old regime. It was very clear it's only a matter of time, and it's also a matter of what would it take until the president is convinced that this regime will change. But everyone, if you have walked in Tahrir Square, if you have talked to the people, you would see the determination, the clarity of the objective. People wanted the regime down. They wanted to change the regime, not just the president. They wanted the system, the way in which politics are run in this country to change. And once the people of Egypt, with different backgrounds, different ages, educated, illiterate, rich and poor, everyone, once they were, they became empowered, they realized how much power they have, and they were prepared to use this power the way they did, it became obvious, I think, to anyone. It became obvious that this regime is on its way out. Again, the question was how long it will take until the president is convinced. And I think the president was ultimately convinced when it became obvious that the army has become the last thing that stands between him and chaos, that stand between Egypt and chaos. And I'm very grateful that he ultimately made that decision without running the risk of a clash between the army and the people.
Samir Shahata, what mechanisms do you think were at play behind the scenes here? It does seem very odd that everyone expected Mubarak to be giving a resignation speech on Thursday, including US President Obama and indeed the head of the CIA. So how did everyone get that so wrong?
Well, I think that people also were hopeful and expecting Mr. Mubarak to resign earlier. You'll remember the first speech that he gave on Friday, the 28th. I think people were expecting something more than what was delivered, and then the second speech a few days later. So I don't know if he's actually or was taking the protests seriously, and I'm not so certain that Mr. Mubarak is the one who decided to step down. I think clearly the military realized some time ago that he was a liability for the institution of the military and a terrible liability for Egypt and Egypt's future. So whether he got the message or whether the message was conveyed to him by people in the Supreme Military Council and so on, I think is something we're not going to know for some time.
OK, well, let's take a quick look at how we got to this momentous point, and then we can look more to the future of what's going to happen in Egypt. January 25th, anti-government protests erupt in central Cairo. 3 days later, they come to a head with around 100 people killed in clashes and the president imposing a curfew. January 29th, Mubarak appoints Omar Suleiman as Egypt's first vice president in 30 years. Then he unveils a new cabinet and the army vows it'll not use force against the people. February 1st, Mubarak says he will stay in power until September, but not seek re-election. The next day, violence breaks out between pro and anti-Mubarak groups in Tahrir Square. February 10th, Mubarak remains steadfast in his resolve to stay in power until September. The very following night, February 11th, Suleiman announces Mubarak's resignation and the transfer of power to the military. Now, we've since heard from the military a number of communiques. The latest, the fourth communique, it says that it intends to keep current ministers in place as a caretaker government. Mr. Fisher, you mentioned earlier that people want to see a change of the whole regime. This indeed is not a change of the regime, is it?
No, it isn't. I don't think that the decision to maintain the current government in place will sit down well with the protesters or with the public. I think, yes, the public has got what it wanted. The head of the regime has stepped down. It sends a very clear message that a change is happening. But I think that all the other symbols of the old regime will have to go as well. I don't see how those ministers can govern with any authority or any legitimacy. The government, the constitution, the assembly, the legislative in its two chambers, I think all this will have to go. The question is how fast this will happen, and the question I'm asking myself is how long the military are planning to keep this government in place, because I don't think that it can stay more than few days. If it does, I won't be surprised if you see protesters going back again on the streets.
Okay, well, let's ask directly one protester, Wael Khalil. Can you speak for the people behind you? Will they stay out on the streets?
None of us can speak for the people. The people have always spoke for themselves. I think that the last communique from the army is a bit ambiguous when they said that they should stay in place until a new government is formed. I personally didn't understand whether a new government means in the coming few days they're going to go towards a national unity government, or the new government after the new election and the government that won the election. I personally not sure. I think I'm siding with the first assumption that they are going to form a new government of national unity. I think they don't have to take this government. It's a liability to anything, despite the fact that it has been quote-unquote in power for about 10 days or slightly more. It's still full of numbers of the old regime. One of the byproducts of the revolution was the disintegration and the fallout of the NDP, and I think any national unity government, any government, caretaking government, should not have any symbol of the NDP in it. This one still has. So I expect that people will be more satisfied, let me put it this way, if we have a national unity government with none of the old regime's symbol.
Okay, Samir Shahata, clearly people of Egypt don't want any connection to the old regime, but then who does that leave to take charge in this interim period?
That's a very good question, and I think the question can actually be, asked differently, which is, who can take charge potentially? And I think there are a lot of people, Wael and his friends and the youth, who have demonstrated tremendous heroism, courage, and forward vision, certainly need to be represented clearly at the table. And let's not forget, Egypt has established judges, well-respected judges, a political class that is also quite sophisticated, without naming names. I mean, there are many: Mohammed al-Baradei, Osama Ghazali Harb, Ayman Noor, members of some of the political parties that existed more on paper than in fact, because of the emergency law and so on. As I mentioned, prominent judges, members of the Muslim Brotherhood who have been participating in politics, and others. But the question is, I think, is the Military Supreme Council moving in that direction, or do they have different plans? And I think we're going to see that in the next few days based on what new pronouncements come forward. So, for example, we haven't heard anything about the emergency law, right? The emergency law is incredibly constricting on political life in Egypt. Are they going to, one of the basic demands that has been on the table for decades by political activists and members of the opposition, will the emergency law be rescinded? So I think in the next couple of days, we're going to see what these people have in mind for Egypt's future and how sincere they are in claiming, as the communique mentioned, their willingness to move Egypt to a democratic future.
Yes, I think if you look at the communique includes also a couple of references that are important. One of them is that the aim is to transfer power to a civilian elected government that will be part of a democratic system. And I think it's a very clear signal by the military that they recognize, at least in principle, that they're not going to be controlling the political system. There is consensus on that on the street as well. If you listen to the debates yesterday about what should be done, of course there are all sorts of models being presented, but the consensus is we need a transitional authority, regardless of the name and the institutional shape that would take. But we need a transitional authority that would have in it all political shades and components of Egypt represented without excluding anyone, without giving anyone a veto power. And I think this is a step in the right direction, because what you need now is relatively a stable, relatively long transitional period during which you look at the constitution, you look at the political parties, you look at emergency laws and all these things in order to create a dynamic and a climate that would enable new political forces to organize themselves, to appear, to attract audience and so on. Another thing is that if you talk to the people in Tahrir Square, they're very keen not to authorize anyone to speak in their name. They're very keen not to delegate power. They tell you, you're welcome to go and negotiate in our name if you want, and then come back to us with the results. We have the right to look at the results and judge them. We are not going back to a one-man rule. We are not going back to give our blessing to someone and give our destiny and leave it in the hands of one person. I think this time is over, and it's one of the main things that have changed in Egypt over the last few weeks.
Everyone nodding in agreement to you there, Mr. Fasher, but the army has, as you well know, had a long involvement in politics. Do you trust that it is indeed ready to step back from proceedings?
I trust that the army will have to. If the army has any illusion about the possibility of controlling politics in Egypt, I think then those who have this illusion haven't read the situation right. What happened in Egypt is that the people, especially the young people who want a new, modern Egypt, who want modern politics, they stepped in and said, enough of that, enough of the old regime. We want to be part of the world. We want to be a normal country. We want to have normal politics. If someone in the army thinks that this message will disappear, I think the person will be disillusioned very quickly. The street is very clear. The people are very clear. They know politics matter. They know they have the power. They're not going to let it go.
Wael, we're seeing at this stage a lot of changes taking place behind closed doors. Do you feel that the young people, the people on the streets, the people of the protest movement are being involved enough?
I don't think this is really the issue here. So far, the street has spoken clearly, not by sending someone or a number of people, but by clearly stating its demands and acting on that. And I think what's key now is that the people who are like cooking what's going to be presented really listen and hear what's being said. I mean, the army has been saying, I think, the right messages. We're waiting to see if they act and they take concrete decisions towards that. I don't think a representation from the movement or from the youth going to really help or impact what's being cooked. I think the street, with its newfound strength and its sense of achievement and sense of invincibility, is the key now. And I think the army is well aware. The army is just sending all the concrete messages. Yes, today they said, we ask the people to cooperate with the police, but we ask the police to really be true to the slogan that the police at the service of the people, which was just restored the past few days. So I think they understand what drives the people during the past days and what will drive them during the coming days. We want a democratic Egypt, a free Egypt, and I think we're going to get that.
Samir Shahata, do you think at this stage it's continues to be beneficial to Egypt, to the people, to see them staying out on the streets until all their demands are met?
Well, of course, different people have different demands, and I think the point of sustained collective action on the level that we've seen since January 25, literally millions of people on the street all throughout the country, from Alexandria to Aswan and so on, is difficult. Not impossible, but difficult. But I don't know if that's necessarily the point. The point is that people have realized the power of their collective action and protest. The networks have been established, and people can go back onto the streets in a week, in 3 days, in the same numbers that we've seen, the high levels of people, if need be. And I think Wael is correct that anything short of what is acceptable in terms of democratic transformation, real structural change in the character of politics, not simply the removal of an autocrat and the replacement with another, or even a deformed kind of democracy, a real fundamental difference. Anything short of that, I think, will again bring out millions of people throughout the country.
Okay, gentlemen, at this point, I just want to bring in the issue of the economy. It's crucial to this. Mr. Fischer, tomorrow, Sunday rather, is the start of a working week. What began this uprising was indeed dire economic conditions for many people in Egypt. How crucial is it now to get businesses back up and running?
I think it's crucial not only to get business back and running, it's crucial to take measures very quickly in order to close or reduce the gap between the rich and poor. One of the main sources of discontent in Egypt is the fact that millions of Egyptians live under poverty line, and that seems to be okay by the government, that the government is doing very little about this poverty, this rampant poverty. Poverty translated in lack of education, lack of access to services, housing, all the poor standards of living, no access to clean water, and so on. People would want to see a change to this. However, I think the people here are smart, they understand, and they're realistic. They don't expect to see a sudden improvement of their living conditions just because Mubarak has left, or even if there is a new government. But if the government takes measures in order to clarify that it is doing something about poverty, it's doing something about corruption, which is staggering. If you just look at the numbers we're hearing about the fortunes of public officials, of people who benefited from being close to the power circle, this is totally unacceptable to the population. If something is done on this, on corruption, something is done on fighting poverty, on improving services and education and so on, if the people see their government as honest and serious about doing this, I think you will see quite a cooperation from the public.
Okay.
The hope.
If I can just jump in, because we are running out of time.
In this is important.
Indeed, and I just want to give one of the last words to Mr. Khalil. How long can people wait for a change in living conditions, a change in the way people survive and live in Egypt?
I don't have the exact answer to that. I think what people we are willing to see is a government that is accountable to the people, that it's doing its best to address the issues of the people, not the government like the last who's saying if you don't have money, you have no need for education or health care. We expect to see a country that provides the basic rights from education to health care to jobs, and if we have to see that the new regime, the new government, is really attempting to do that. And I have to say that we are coming to a free election, and we're going to see differences in propositions and different political currents, or whether they're party coalitions or whatever, really proposing how to move forward. And I think we'll have to choose accordingly.
One thing that Mubarak said in an interview just before he stepped down, he said that chaos would come to Egypt without him. Mr. Khalil, what do you respond to that?
I think they tried to induce terror and chaos. We will find out how deep what they tried to do, but I think living through the 18 days of the revolution, without the police, with all the gangs of thugs, all the freed prisoners, the rumors of people running rampant, and how well people responding by setting up the neighborhood watches in hours rather than in days. And really, we were not afraid. Yesterday, there were no policemen on the street. Demonstrations were all over the country and all over the street in Egypt, and not a single incident, as far as I know, of looting or of rioting or sabotage. I think the chaos scenario has failed miserably, and more people realize that now. And I don't think, having survived the 18 days of the revolution, we're going to be frightened by the stories about chaos and stuff.
Okay, historic times indeed. Certainly plenty more to discuss, but for now, gentlemen, we will have to leave it there. In Cairo, Wael Khalil and Ezzeddine Shukri Fischer. And in Washington, D.C., Samir Shahata. Thank you all very much for joining us on this Inside Story. And thank you for watching. If you want to get involved with any comments or suggestions, please do drop a line to insidestory@aljazeera.net. Bye for now.